Turn off the lights if you dare, because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. It started like nothing more than a hobby. A group of high school friends with too much free time and not enough sense had gotten into urban exploring. At first it was harmless. Old construction sites, half-collapsed barns, the occasional trip into a long-abandoned mall. They loved the thrill of walking where no one else dared, chasing that rush of danger, without ever really believing they were in danger. But there's a big difference between a crumbling building in the city and what they found in the desert. The one who pushed them into it was Charles. He wasn't the kind of guy people expected to lead an adventure. Skinny, quiet, more interested in photography than football. But Charles had this way of finding places. Online in forums, on obscure social media accounts. He always seemed to know where something strange was hiding. One night, he pulled out his phone and showed them an Instagram page he claimed he'd stumbled across. No name, no captions, just a handful of grainy photos, rusted rails disappearing into blackness, splintered wooden beams, graffiti scrawled across stone walls. Each picture tagged with a set of GPS coordinates. Most of the group laughed it off. It looked sketchy, maybe fake. But Charles insisted. He said these were real abandoned mine shafts out in the desert, untouched for decades. And if they wanted an adventure, this was it. So the next weekend, four of them piled into a beat-up sedan and drove hours into nowhere. The road stretched endlessly, the kind of silence that makes you forget the world even exists. They joked at first, blasting music, tossing snacks at each other. But the farther they went, the quieter the car became. Mile after mile of rock, sand, and dead brush. No towns, no people, just emptiness. When they finally reached the coordinates, there was nothing. No shaft, no ruins, just a desert stretching on forever. The driver swore Charles had dragged them out here for nothing. They were about to turn back when Charles shouted from the edge of a small ridge. And there it was, a collapsed wooden frame, half buried in the sand. What looked like the mouth of something much deeper. The air grew heavy. Even standing outside, it felt wrong, like the earth itself was holding its breath. They argued for a while whether it was safe, whether it was even worth it. The driver wanted to leave. Another guy was already pulling out his phone, planning to take photos just to prove they'd found it. But Charles? He was already tying a rope to a boulder, flashlight in hand. And against their better judgment, they followed him down. The shaft swallowed them whole. Inside, the light from the desert sun faded almost immediately. Their flashlights carved shaky beams across splintered beams and rusted rails. The walls dripped with condensation, the air thick with dust. Every footstep echoed too loudly, like the mine was listening. They laughed nervously, trying to shake the tension. One of them shouted just to hear the echo bounce back. But the sound didn't bounce. It sank, like the earth had swallowed it. Deeper and deeper they went. And that's when they heard it, a faint scraping. Metal against stone. Everyone froze. They swung their flashlights, but the tunnel stretched endlessly. The sound came again, louder this time, a dragging, screeching noise from somewhere ahead. Probably just rocks shifting, someone whispered. But then came the crash. A rusted tin can drop from the ceiling, clattering across the rails. The sound echoed, sharper than it should have been. And then, the scream. It wasn't human. High-pitched, metallic, a screech that rattled their bones. It came from deep inside the tunnel, rushing toward them like a wave. Panic exploded. Flashlights swung wildly as they bolted for the rope. The tunnel seemed to stretch, every second an eternity, though it groaned above them, as if the mine itself was trying to collapse. One of them tripped. His shoe slipped off, lost in the dark. But there was no time to grab it. The scream grew louder, closer, echoing off every surface. They hauled themselves up the rope with scraped hands, hearts pounding, lungs burning. When they burst into daylight, they didn't stop running. Not until the car was in sight, the desert sun blinding their eyes. Only then did they realize they were shaking, bleeding, covered in dust. No one spoke on the ride home. No one wanted to admit what they'd heard. But Charles couldn't let it go. A few days later, he returned alone. He said he just wanted to grab the shoe they left behind. When he came back, he was pale, trembling. He dropped the shoe on the ground in front of them without saying a word. The fabric was shredded, torn apart in long, jagged rips, and across the rubber sole, deep indentations, like bite marks. Not human, not animal, something else. To this day, none of them will talk about what they heard in that mine. But Charles still has the shoe locked in a box under his bed, as proof that what chased him out of the desert that day wasn't just in their heads. I had just started a part-time job as a caretaker for an older man who suffered from dementia. His family couldn't stay overnight, so they paid me to handle the graveyard shift. Honestly, I thought it would be easy money. Just sit around, keep an eye on him, maybe help him if he woke up confused. The first night wasn't too bad. He wandered a bit, mumbled things under his breath, but nothing I couldn't handle. By the second night, though, I noticed something strange. Around 2 a.m, he started pacing in the hallway. At first, it was just shuffling footsteps. Then he began whispering, low, broken words I couldn't make out. By the third night, things escalated. I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone when I heard a loud bang in the kitchen. I rushed over and found the old man standing in the middle of the room, staring at the wall. His eyes looked empty, like he wasn't really there. I tried guiding him back to bed, but he resisted, muttering something about the shadows and the door. I chalked it up to his condition until the fourth night. I was half asleep in the recliner when I heard a sound that froze my blood. The closet door in the hallway creaked open. Slowly, I thought maybe he was in there, rummaging around like before. But when I walked over and pulled the door open, what I saw made me step back. He was crouched inside, clutching something in his hand. It was a kitchen knife. He looked up at me, his face pale, his mouth twisted in a half smile that didn't look like him at all. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, as calmly as if nothing was wrong, he said, I was just keeping this safe. I didn't argue. I didn't try to grab it. I just backed away and pretended like everything was fine, my heart pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. The rest of the night, I locked myself in the guest room and didn't sleep a single second. The next morning, I told his family what happened. They laughed it off, said I must have misunderstood. But here's the thing. When I left that house, I checked the kitchen. Every knife was neatly in place, except the one he'd been holding. I quit the job immediately. And to this day, I still wonder, was it really just his illness? Or did he know exactly what he was doing? Because sometimes, dementia isn't the scariest part of the job. But danger doesn't always come from the people you're hired to watch. Sometimes it comes from the person sleeping just down the hall. It was a Thursday night, which usually meant the bar was slow. Just a handful of regulars, a couple of lonely drinkers, nothing out of the ordinary. I was restocking glasses when the door opened and this man walked in. Immediately, I knew he didn't fit. He was dressed like he belonged at a business gala, not in a half-empty dive bar. Sharp gray suit, polished black shoes, a tie that probably cost more than my paycheck. But what really threw me off were his eyes. They didn't match the rest of him. His mouth smiled politely, but his eyes, they were flat, almost cold, like the smile was a mask. He sat at the bar, ordered something simple, a whiskey neat, and then started talking to me. Not casual chit-chat, either. He went straight for personal questions. How long have you worked here? Do you live nearby? Do you usually walk home after your shift? I brushed it off with short answers, trying to sound casual, but inside I was on edge. The way he asked wasn't flirty, wasn't friendly. It was like he was gathering information. When I set down his drink, he slipped $100 bill under the glass. I thought maybe it was a mistake, but he just gave me that same smile and said, "Keep the change." Nobody tips like that in this bar. Nobody. The next week he came back. Same suit, same smile, but this time he wasn't alone. A woman walked in with him. She was striking, not in a glamorous way, but in the way she carried herself. Confident, like she already knew she had your attention. She leaned against the counter, watching me closely. Too closely. After a few minutes, she smiled and said, "You'd be perfect for a job we have." I froze. Perfect for what? Before I could even ask, the man placed his hand gently on her arm, almost like he was reminding her to stop. She gave me this look, like she knew something I didn't. Then they both left without finishing their drinks. That night, when I closed up, I felt uneasy walking home. My usual shortcut was through an alley, but when I reached it, I saw a dark van parked with its engine running. No one was inside, at least no one I could see, but my gut screamed not to go that way. I walked the long route home instead. The next day, my manager pulled me aside and showed me security footage. The man and woman had left together, but just outside the camera's view, two other people were waiting near that same alley, both wearing masks, both watching. I still wonder what would have happened if I had taken my usual path that night. It was the summer of 2007. A 14-year-old boy had the house to himself for the night. His parents had gone out, his siblings were away, and it was supposed to be an easy, stress-free evening. He settled in with his PlayStation 2, switching between Grand Theft Auto and Need for Speed, the kind of comfort gaming any teen would lose hours in. Around 7 p.m., he called in a pizza order to the local shop. Nothing unusual. When the driver finally showed up, the boy opened the door without thinking twice. But what he saw immediately set off alarm bells in the back of his mind. The man standing at the door wasn't the friendly, chatty kind of delivery guy you'd expect. He looked rough, disheveled, and his eyes scanned past the boy into the house itself, like he was looking for something or someone. When the teen handed over the money, the driver paused. His voice was low, almost probing when he asked, "You home alone?" The question came out casual, but it felt anything but normal. The boy laughed nervously and muttered something about his dad being upstairs. The driver didn't push further. He just handed over the pizza, gave a strange little smirk, and left. But the feeling he left behind in that house was heavy, the kind of unease that makes you check the locks twice. For the next few hours, the boy tried to shake it off. He ate his pizza, played his games, and did his best to convince himself it was nothing. But by 10 p.m., when the glow of the TV was the only light in the room, a new sound broke the silence. A knock at the front door. He froze. His parents weren't supposed to be home yet. He wasn't expecting anyone else. He crept toward the door, heart pounding, and called out, "Who is it?" Silence. He peered through the peephole, but no one was there. He swallowed hard, double-checked the lock, and backed away. A few minutes later, another knock. This time, softer, almost playful. The boy's hand shook as he pulled the blinds back on a nearby window, just in time to see a shadow moving quickly out of sight. Minutes felt like hours. Every creak of the old house made him jump. And then, around 11, it happened. The unmistakable sound of the back door being forced open. The crack of wood. The shuffle of footsteps across the kitchen floor. Someone was inside. The boy ran upstairs, his heart slamming against his ribs, and locked himself in his bedroom. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator as quietly as possible. But the intruder was already climbing the stairs. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped right outside his room. The doorknob rattled once. Then again, slowly, methodically, like the man was savoring the moment. The boy pressed his back against the wall, tears welling in his eyes, trying not to make a sound. And then, sirens in the distance. The knob stopped turning. Heavy footsteps retreated down the hall. Then a slam echoed through the house as the intruder bolted out the back. When the police arrived, they swept the house from top to bottom. The back door was hanging off its hinges. The lock splintered. No one was inside, but there were muddy footprints leading in and out, proof that the boy hadn't imagined it. The officers asked him if he'd noticed anyone strange earlier that night, and immediately, his mind went back to that delivery driver. The question, the smirk, the way he'd looked past him into the house. When his parents got home, shaken and panicked, they called the pizza place the boy had ordered from. But when they asked about the driver, the manager said something that made the whole situation even more chilling. No one on staff that night matched the boy's description. And according to the records, the pizza hadn't even been delivered by one of their drivers. The boy never saw that man again. And to this day, he still doesn't know who actually came to his door that night, or what would have happened if the police hadn't shown up in time. That night left him with scars that still follow him into adulthood. But as terrifying as it wasn't the only time an innocent knock on the door turned into something much darker. I was hauling freight through the Arizona desert one summer night. Sometime after 2 a.m., the road was dead quiet, not a single pair of headlights for miles. That kind of silence where you can hear the hum of your own engine almost echoing back at you. Then up ahead, maybe 200 yards down the asphalt, I see this car just sitting in the middle of the highway, hazards blinking, passenger door wide open. I slowed down, leaned forward in my seat, trying to figure out what I'm looking at. The thing is parked at a weird angle, almost blocking both lanes. My first thought was maybe someone broke down and needed help. You see that a lot out there. But the closer I got, the stranger it looked. There was no one inside. Driver's seat empty. Passenger seat empty. Just an open door swaying slightly like it had been left in a hurry. Something about it felt wrong. But curiosity got the better of me. I pulled over onto the shoulder, killed my high beams, and climbed down from my cab. Desert air was hot and dry, but I remember feeling this cold chill run up my arms as I walked toward the car. When I got close enough, I noticed the trunk was tied shut with rope. Not latched, not jammed, actually tied down, like someone didn't want it opening. And wedged in the gaps were black garbage bags, stuffed so tight they looked like they were about to burst. I just stood there for a second, staring at it, trying to decide if I really wanted to know what was inside. Then, bang, a gunshot cracked the air. The echo rolled across the desert, so sharp it made my ears ring. I hit the ground instinctively, heart pounding, and that's when I heard a voice. Rough, angry, carrying across the empty highway. Get the hill away from there. I scrambled back toward my truck, and that's when I saw him, a man with red hair, wearing dirty overalls, stepping out from the brush on the side of the road, one hand holding a shovel, the other gripping a rifle. He wasn't running. He wasn't stumbling around like some lunatic. He walked slow, steady, like he knew exactly what he was doing, and his eyes locked on me the whole time. I didn't wait around to find out what came next. I sprinted back to my rig, fired it up, and floored it down the highway. But when I checked my mirrors, I nearly choked on my breath. Headlights. That red Ford Fusion was right on my tail. He honked, swerved, got so close I thought he was going to clip the back of my trailer. My whole rig shuddered from the turbulence as I pushed every ounce of speed I could. For miles, he stayed on me, headlights flashing, horn blaring, until finally I saw the red and blue lights of a highway patrol car up ahead. Relief washed over me. But it didn't last. The moment the cop pulled onto the shoulder, that red car swerved hard, tore off into the desert sand, and vanished into the night. Just like that. When the officer came up to my cab, I tried to explain what happened. The abandoned car, the man with the rifle, the chase. But when they searched the stretch of highway, there was nothing there. No car, no footprints, not even tire tracks in the sand where the Ford Fusion had veered off. It was like it had never existed. And to this day, I can still see his eyes in my mirror. Calm, focused, like he wasn't chasing me out of rage, but because I had seen something I was never supposed to. Some people go to the desert for peace, for quiet nights, endless stars, and the feeling of being far away from the chaos of the city. That was exactly what drew one couple out there. Two people who loved the outdoors and thought they knew what wilderness really meant. They had camped in forests before, hiked mountains, even spent nights in the backcountry with nothing but a tent and a lighter. But the desert was new, and it seemed perfect. Wide open skies, no light pollution, no tourists or campers for miles. That first night was beautiful. The air was crisp, the stars endless, the silence almost comforting. They sat by the fire, drank from a flask, and talked about nothing at all. By midnight, the fire was dying down, and they crawled into their tent, wrapped in the kind of quiet that makes you believe the world is safe. But the desert has a way of reminding you that it's not. Sometime after midnight, they both woke to a sound. It was faint at first, a long, low moan carried by the wind. They lay there in silence, listening. Maybe it was an animal, a coyote, a stray dog, but it didn't sound quite right. Too deep, too drawn out. They brushed it off, pulled the sleeping bags tighter, and forced themselves back to sleep. The next night, it came again, louder this time. The same sound, a wailing, almost human cry somewhere in the distance. The woman asked if they should leave. The man laughed it off, said the desert plays tricks on your ears. Sound carries out here, he told her. It could be miles away. But neither of them slept much that night. On the third night, the desert stopped pretending. It was well after midnight when they heard it. Not the distant moan this time, but something closer. The crunch of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, circling the tent. They froze, holding their breath. The woman whispered if it was a coyote, but the man shook his head. Coyotes don't walk like that, and coyotes don't carry lighters, because that's when they heard the flick. A sharp click, the unmistakable sound of a lighter sparking. Then a thin hiss, the faint smell of fuel, and just beyond the nylon wall of the tent, a brief glow. Someone was out there. The man unzipped the tent slowly, his flashlight shaking in his hand. He barely made it out before he saw it. A small flame, licking across the side of their campfire pit. Someone had splashed fuel on the kindling and lit it not with matches, but with deliberate intent. He shouted into the darkness, but no one answered. The fire caught quickly, climbing higher, threatening to reach their tent. Both of them scrambled to put it out, kicking dirt, pouring water, suffocating the flames with their blankets. By the time the fire died, the desert was silent again, but whoever had lit it was gone. They didn't sleep. They packed up their gear in silence, too afraid to speak. By dawn, they were already driving, hoping to find the highway, the nearest gas station, any sign of people. But the desert doesn't let go so easily. As the sun rose, they realized they were lost. No matter how far they drove, no familiar landmarks appeared. Their phones had no service. The GPS flickered in and out, leading them in circles. And that's when it started again. The screams. Not just one, not distant this time. Dozens of voices, shrill and overlapping, echoing across the sand. Some high-pitched, some guttural, some almost childlike. It came from every direction at once, bouncing off the rocks, filling the air until their ears rang. The woman begged him to stop the car, but the man pressed harder on the gas. The sound grew closer, like the voices were chasing them, keeping pace with the car no matter how fast they went. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence. That silence was worse than the noise. They finally stumbled onto a highway, hours later, exhausted, shaking, half convinced they'd imagined it. But when they looked back, the desert stretched out endlessly behind them, flat and empty. No footprints, no people, no sign that anyone had been there. They told their story to police, who shrugged it off as stress, dehydration, maybe even the sound of wind across the rocks. But both of them knew what they'd heard, and both of them knew that someone or something had been waiting for them out there. To this day, neither of them has camped in the desert again, because the desert doesn't always give you peace. Sometimes it gives you something else entirely. Walmart at night is a strange place. The aisles feel longer, the shelves taller, and every sound echoes. I was restocking in the pet food section when I noticed him, a man, standing perfectly still at the end of the aisle. Not shopping, not moving, just watching me. At first, I told myself he was probably waiting for me to finish, so he could grab something. But as I moved to another aisle, he followed, always a few steps behind, never speaking, never reaching for anything on the shelves. It went on for almost 15 minutes. I tried to stay calm, but every time I glanced back, he was there. Then a woman appeared out of nowhere. She walked up to me with this polite smile and said softly, "I can help you get away from him." I felt immediate relief. Finally, someone had noticed what was happening. She gestured for me to follow her, leading me toward the back exit. For a moment, I almost went with her, but something didn't feel right. The way she kept glancing, not at me, but at the man, and the way they seemed connected. I pretended I had to grab something from another aisle and turned quickly. When I looked back, she and the man were walking out together, side by side. But the part that still haunts me, as they passed, the woman looked straight at me and whispered my name. I had never seen her before in my life. I thought I knew fear, but nothing compares to the kind that hits you when you think someone's about to take your child. It was a regular weekday afternoon, and I was on my way to pick up my little brother from school. My mom had asked me to grab him, since she was running late from work. It was supposed to be simple, Pull up, wait by the gates, bring him home. The schoolyard was buzzing with kids and parents. The usual chaos of dismissal. I spotted him right away, his backpack bouncing as he ran toward me. But before I could wave, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A man I'd never seen before was standing a few feet away from the gate, leaning casually against a tree. He wasn't watching the crowd. He was watching my brother. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just another parent, waiting for his own kid. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. His eyes never left my brother. I started walking faster, weaving through the crowd. But before I could reach him, the man stepped forward. He bent down, smiling, and said something I couldn't hear. My brother stopped in his tracks. Panic surged through me. "Hey!" I shouted, pushing past a group of kids. "What are you doing?" The man looked up, startled, like he hadn't expected anyone to notice. Then, without saying a word, he turned and started walking away, fast. My brother ran into my arms, confused, asking who that man was. I didn't have an answer. All I could do was hold on to him and scan the crowd, making sure the stranger was really gone. But the story didn't end there. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something about the man's face stuck with me. The way he looked at my brother, like he already owned him. I barely slept. The next day, I mentioned it to the school staff. They seemed concerned but not surprised. That's when one of the teachers pulled me aside and lowered her voice. "You're not the first person to notice him," she said. "We've had reports of a man hanging around the gates for weeks now. But every time we try to confront him, he disappears." Her words made my blood run cold. This wasn't random. He had been watching, waiting. I don't know what his plan was, or how many times he'd tried before. All I know is that if I'd been a minute later that day, if my brother had taken just a few more steps toward him, I might not be telling this story. And as terrifying as it is to almost lose someone, there's something even worse. Realizing the danger doesn't always vanish when you catch it. Sometimes, it just moves on to the next victim. This next one, I don't even know how to explain it. And honestly, I don't care if people believe me or not. I know what I saw. It was late. Always is when these things happen. I was driving a stretch of highway in New Mexico. No town for miles, no other drivers in sight. Just me, my rig, and the endless blacktop cutting through the desert. The moon was out, but thin. One of those nights where everything looks silver and hollow. My headlights were the only real light on that road, and they reached just far enough to show the next set of dashed lines before swallowing the rest in darkness. That's when I noticed it. A shadow on the road. At first I thought it was just a tree or maybe a signpost throwing across the asphalt. But as I got closer, it didn't stretch or move like a normal shadow. It just stayed there, fixed. I slowed down, leaning forward, trying to make sense of it. It was the outline of a person, arms hanging at their sides, head slightly tilted, perfectly still. But there was nothing, no body, no figure, just a shadow lying flat across the pavement like someone invisible was standing right there under my headlights. My stomach dropped. Every instinct screamed at me not to stop. So I didn't. I pressed the accelerator, keeping my eyes locked on that dark shape as I rolled right over it. And here's the part that haunts me. The shadow's head turned. Not the shape, not the angle on the road. I mean the head itself, twisted, following me as I passed. I damn near ripped the wheel out of the dash, trying not to swerve. My heart was pounding, so hard it drowned out the sound of the engine. A few miles later, I tried to calm myself down, convincing myself it was a trick of the light, maybe fatigue messing with my eyes. But then I saw another one, and another, each one different. A tall figure, a hunched one that looked like it was crawling. I kept driving mile after mile, and the shadows kept showing up always just at the edge of my headlights, always on a road directly in front of me. Then I looked in my mirrors, and that's when the bottom dropped out of my stomach, because the road behind me was filled with them. Dozens of shadows, stretched across the pavement as far back as I could see, all twisted in different poses. And even though I couldn't hear a thing over my engine, I swear I could feel them screaming. I didn't stop until I reached the next city, parked my rig under the brightest lights I could find, and sat there until sunrise, hands shaking too bad to even pour myself coffee. To this day, I avoid that stretch of highway. Don't know if it was something paranormal, or if the desert plays tricks on your eyes after too many hours awake. But here's what sticks with me most. Every once in a while, late at night, I'll catch something flicker at the edge of my headlights, just for a second, a shape where no shape should be. And every time, it feels like they're still out there, waiting. There's something comforting about the sound of nature. Crickets chirping, birds singing, leaves rustling in the breeze. But silence in the woods is never a good sign. Emily and her friends learned this the hard way. They were hiking through a remote forest far from the usual trails. The map showed a shortcut, one that would shave hours off their trip. At first, it seemed fine. Tall trees, sunlight filtering through the leaves. But after a while, they noticed something strange. No birds, no insects, nothing. The deeper they walked, the heavier the silence became. Even the wind seemed to stop, the trees standing perfectly still, as if holding their breath. Emily tried to laugh it off. "Guess it's just too hot for the animals," she said. But her voice sounded too loud, like it didn't belong there. Then came the smell, faint at first, but growing stronger with every step. A sweet, rotting odor that made their stomachs turn. "Maybe it's a dead deer," one of her friends muttered. But the smell wasn't coming from one spot. It hung in the air everywhere. Then they found the clearing. At first glance, it looked normal. Grass, rocks. But at the center was something that made their blood run cold. A circle of dead birds. Dozens of them. Perfectly arranged, beaks pointing outward, wings spread wide. The group stared in horror. Not one of them moved. Not one made a sound. And then, all at once, they heard it. A whisper. Low, unintelligible, coming from the trees. Emily spun around, but there was no one there, just the endless forest, silent and watching. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, voices pressing against their ears. "Let's go," one of her friends said, panic rising. They turned back the way they came, but the path was gone. No trail, no footprints, just trees. It was as if the forest had swallowed it whole. The whispers grew deafening. Emily clutched her head, screaming, but the sound only grew sharper, like claws scraping inside her skull. Then, silence. The birds were gone. The smell was gone. The forest looked normal again. But when they finally stumbled back to the main road hours later, none of them spoke about what had happened. Not until weeks later, when Emily heard it again, that same whisper. But this time, it wasn't in the forest. It was in her own backyard. I used to work in a downtown office building, covering the overnight shift for maintenance. Most of the time it was quiet, just me, some fluorescent lights, and the occasional hum of the AC. One night, I needed to grab something from the lobby. I called the elevator, stepped inside, and pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors were about to close when a hand shot through, stopping them. A man slipped inside. He was tall, dressed in a dark hoodie, and he never looked at me. He just stood in the corner, facing the wall. At first, I thought maybe he was just drunk or lost, But as the elevator descended, he started muttering, "Low," almost inaudible words. I couldn't make them out, but I swear he was saying numbers, counting down. My stomach tightened. The elevator dinged at the lobby, and I bolted out as fast as I could. I didn't even look back. I ran straight to the security desk and told the guard what happened. He pulled up the feed from the elevator camera. We rewound it, watching me get in. Then the man, except on the screen, the doors never reopened. There was no man. It was just me, standing alone, staring into the corner of the elevator. There's a certain kind of fear that doesn't come from shadows or creaking floors. It comes from a knock at your front door when you least expect it. I was home alone one evening, just winding down after a long day. It was late, around 11, and the neighborhood was quiet. I wasn't expecting visitors, so when the doorbell rang, it immediately put me on edge. I peeked through the peephole, and there she was, a woman, mid-30s maybe, wearing a faded hoodie, her hair messy like she'd been walking for hours. She smiled, but there was something off about it. Too wide, too forced. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice muffled through the door. I didn't move, didn't answer. Instinct screamed at me to stay quiet, but she knocked again, harder this time. "I just need to use your phone," she said. "Please, just for a minute." Something about the way she said it sent a chill down my spine. Not desperate, not nervous, just flat, like she was reading from a script. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me, and whispered to the door, "I'm sorry, I can't help you." Silence. For a moment, I thought she'd left. But when I leaned closer to the peephole, she was still there. Only now, she wasn't smiling. Her face had gone blank. Her eyes locked on the door, like she could see straight through it. That's when I noticed something else. She wasn't alone. Just at the edge of the porch light, barely visible, was the outline of a man, standing completely still, watching. My chest tightened, and I backed away from the door. My phone was already in my hand, and I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The operator told me to stay inside and keep the doors locked. While I waited for the police, the knocking continued. Louder, faster. She kept repeating the same line over and over. "Just let me in. Just let me in." Then, suddenly it stopped. I crept back to the peephole. They were gone. But the weirdest part wasn't that they left. It was where they left to. The street was empty, the sidewalk clear. No footsteps, no shadows, just the silence, like they had vanished into thin air. By the time the police arrived, the neighborhood looked completely normal. They searched around, shined flashlights into the trees, but found nothing. One of the officers shrugged and said maybe it was just some strangers messing around. But I know what I saw. That smile, that blank stare, and the figure in the shadows, waiting. To this day, every time the doorbell rings unexpectedly, I feel my stomach drop. Because sometimes the danger doesn't break in. It just waits for you to open the door. And sometimes the people outside don't want to get in. They want to make sure you come out. Motel rooms are supposed to feel temporary. A bed, a shower, a place to crash before hitting the road again. But for Matthew, one particular motel became the setting for a memory he can never erase. It was late summer, and he was on a solo trip, taking the back roads through small towns. He pulled into a roadside motel just past midnight, exhausted. The neon sign buzzed faintly. the office door creaking as he stepped inside. The clerk barely looked up. "Room 6, he muttered, sliding a key across the counter. The motel was half empty, doors lined up along the parking lot. But one detail caught Matthew's attention. Room 7's door was padlocked shut. Unlike the others, it had no curtains, no light, just heavy chains looped across the handle. He brushed it off. Old buildings always had quirks. But later that night, as he tried to sleep, he heard it, a thud, then another, coming from the other side of the wall. Room 7. Matthew froze, listening. The sound grew louder, a dragging noise, like furniture being pulled across the floor. Then, unmistakably, a voice, muffled, pleading, "Help me?" He sat up in bed, heart hammering. The voice came again, louder this time, desperate. Against his better judgment, Matthew stepped outside. The air was heavy, the buzzing neon sign flickering above. He walked slowly toward room 7. The padlock was still there, the chain still wrapped tightly around the handle. But the door rattled violently, as if someone inside was trying to break free. "Please," the voice cried out. "Don't let him." Silence. The rattling stopped. The next morning, Matthew went to the office. His hands shook as he asked the clerk, "What's in room 7? The man's face darkened. "Nothing. Hasn't been used in years." "But I heard." "You didn't hear anything," the clerk snapped, his eyes cold. "Some advice, kid. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." Matthew checked out immediately, driving away without looking back. But weeks later, lying awake in his own bed, he heard it again, the faint sound of the chain rattling, a voice whispering through the walls, "Help me?" This one happened back when I was still green. I'd only been driving a few months, still figuring out the rhythms of the road. My dispatcher had thrown me on a long haul overnight, and I was pushing through somewhere in Oklahoma, trying not to nod off behind the wheel. You know that feeling when the road gets hypnotic? Lines blurring, eyes heavy, your brain starting to drift. I needed caffeine. Bad. So when I saw this old gas station sign glowing faintly in the distance, I pulled off without thinking twice. The building sat on the edge of the highway, the kind of place that probably hadn't seen steady business in years. One flickering neon light buzzed weakly, spelling out open 24 hours, though it looked more like a threat than an invitation. I parked my rig, killed the engine, and stepped out into the heavy summer night. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked up, and right away something felt off. The glass door was smeared with dirt, like no one had cleaned it in ages. Inside, the shelves were stripped bare. A few dusty candy bars, a half-open box of chips, but nothing that looked fresh. The soda fridge hummed loudly against the back wall, its light flickering on and off, casting the place in stuttering shadows. And then I noticed the smell, not the musty old dust smell you expect from an abandoned place. This was sour, damp, like wet cardboard and unwashed clothes. Still, I walked the aisles, thinking maybe I'd grab a bottle of something to keep me awake. But the deeper I went, the heavier the silence felt, like the building itself was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a scrape, faint but clear, like someone shifting their weight across a dirty floor. I froze. My hand hovered near my pocket knife, even though I knew damn well a 3-inch blade wasn't going to save me if something went wrong. "Hello?" I called out, my voice way too loud in the silence. No answer, just another scrape, then another, coming from the far corner, where the lights didn't quite reach. That was enough for me. I turned on my heel and walked fast toward the door, trying not to break into a sprint. My boots echoed against the cracked tile, and for a moment I swore I could hear footsteps behind me, just barely out of sync with my own. When I stepped back into night air, it felt like I'd broken the surface of deep water. I didn't look back. I just climbed into my cab, slammed the door, and started the engine. I pulled out fast, headlights washing over the storefront one last time. And that's when I saw it. A figure, standing just inside the glass door. Pale face, dark eyes, watching me leave. I hit the gas harder than I ever had before and didn't let off until the station was a fading dot in my mirrors. Now here's the kicker. A couple hours later, I stopped at a truck stop to grab a proper coffee and clear my head. I must have looked shaken because another driver asked what was wrong. I told him about the abandoned station, how it looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but the lights were still on. His expression changed instantly. "Which exit?" he asked. I told him, and he shook his head. That place burned down 5 years ago. I laughed it off at first, but he wasn't joking. Said the building was condemned after a fire, boarded up, never rebuilt. I went back through there a few months later, in the daytime, just to prove him wrong. But when I pulled off that exit, there was nothing there, just an empty lot. Overgrown with weeds, the outline of a foundation barely visible in the dirt. So, what the hell did I walk into that night? Every trucker's heard stories. Some are about strange lights in the sky, others about phantom hitchhikers or old rest stops that don't exist anymore. But the one that stuck with me the most came from a night I wish I could forget. I was pushing through Nevada, late, dead tired, but determined to make it another 100 miles before pulling off. Out there, the desert stretches forever, a straight road cutting through nothingness. That's when I saw them. Headlights. At first just a couple way off in the distance. But as I rolled closer, I realized it wasn't just one or two trucks. It was a whole line, at least 10 rigs, perfectly spaced, cruising together in formation. I'd seen convoys before, but something about this one was different. No chatter on the CB, no license plates I could make out, just a line of massive semis, chrome glinting in the moonlight, rumbling steady at 60. I eased in behind them, thinking maybe I could catch a draft and ride along for a while. But almost immediately, something felt wrong. Their taillights didn't look right. Too dim, like they weren't really lit, just glowing faintly in the dark. And the longer I followed, the colder it felt in my cab, like the air itself had dropped 10 degrees. I picked up the mic, tried reaching out. "Breaker 19, you boys up ahead running together?" Nothing, just static. Then, without warning, the lead truck swerved, smooth, sharp, all at once, and the whole convoy followed. One by one, they turned off onto a narrow dirt road I hadn't even noticed until that moment. No signals, no hesitation, just a perfect synchronized turn into the desert. Curiosity got the better of me. I slowed, thinking about following them, maybe just to see where a convoy that size was headed at 3 in the morning. But when my headlights swept across the turnoff, there were no tire tracks, no dust in the air, no road, just empty desert stretching out under the moonlight. I slammed the brakes and sat there, heart hammering, staring into nothing. I knew what I saw. 10 rigs, chrome gleaming, engines growling, a full convoy. And in the blink of an eye, they were gone. I didn't stick around to question it. I drove harder than I ever had that night, like the darkness itself was chasing me. And to this day, I wonder, were they ghosts? Spirits of truckers who never made a home? Or something else entirely? Something not meant to be seen by the living? All I know is this. If you're ever driving through Nevada in the dead of night and you spot a line of trucks running without a word, don't follow them. Because some roads out there don't lead anywhere you'd ever want to go. Every family has secrets. Some are small, like hidden photographs or stories nobody tells at dinner. But some are darker. And sometimes those secrets don't stay buried forever. For Claire, it started with a single photograph. She was cleaning out the attic after her mother's sudden passing. Dust covered everything. Cardboard boxes, old Christmas decorations, half-broken furniture. Most of it was junk. But at the bottom of one box was a leather-bound photo album, worn and cracked with age. The first few pages were harmless enough. Pictures of her as a baby, her first birthday, a vacation by the lake. But then the photos started to change. There were images of her mother, standing in places Claire didn't recognize. Empty fields, boarded up houses, back roads in the middle of nowhere, always at night, always alone, in some photos. Her mother wasn't even looking at the camera. Her face was turned, staring off into the dark, as if she was watching someone or something. The last page was worse. It wasn't a family picture at all, just a single Polaroid of a man Claire had never seen before. His eyes were wide, his mouth frozen mid-scream, his face twisted in fear. And across the bottom, in her mother's handwriting, was a single word: him. Claire's stomach dropped. She wanted to believe it was a joke, maybe an old friend of her mother's playing a prank. But there was nothing funny about that man's expression, nothing staged about the terror in his eyes. She tried to push it out of her mind, but the more she thought about it, the more it consumed her. Who was he? And why did her mother have his picture? The next day, she decided to search her mother's house more carefully. In the bedroom closet, tucked behind a stack of winter coats, she found a lockbox. It wasn't fancy, just metal with a small keyhole. But inside was the answer she didn't want. The key was hidden in a jar on the dresser. She turned it slowly, hands shaking, and lifted the lid. Inside were scraps of newspaper clippings, articles about missing people, mostly men, spanning nearly 30 years. Some local, some from towns far away. Each clipping was circled in red pen, with dates scribbled in the margins. At the bottom of the box was something worse. Another Polaroid. Not the same man this time. A different one. Young, maybe in his 20s. Bound to a chair. Eyes wide with fear. Claire dropped it. Her hands went cold. Her mother wasn't just a sweet old woman who baked cookies and went to church. She had been hiding something. Something monstrous. But that was only the beginning. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She sat in her mother's room, staring at the box, at the Polaroids, at the handwriting on the back of each one. She thought about calling the police, about turning everything over. But then she heard the sound. It was faint, coming from the hallway. A soft creak, like footsteps on the wooden floor. She froze. Her mother's house was supposed to be empty. Slowly, she stepped into the hallway. The sound grew louder. Not footsteps scratching, nails dragging across the wall. Her breath caught in her throat. She whispered, "Mom," before realizing how insane it sounded. The scratching stopped. She turned the corner and saw nothing. Just the same hallway, the same faded wallpaper, except for one thing: the photo album. It was lying open on the floor, though she'd left it in the attic hours ago. And the last page, the photo of a screaming man, was gone. Her chest tightened. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Instead, she stumbled back into the bedroom and slammed the door. She pressed her back against it, whispering to herself that it wasn't real, that it was just grief, just her imagination. But then she heard the voice, faint, muffled, coming from the other side of the door. A man's voice, pleading, "Help me." She covered her ears, but the voice grew louder, angrier, desperate. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was many, layered on top of each other. A chorus of screams, trapped, clawing to get out. She bolted from the house at dawn, clutching the box to her chest. Later, she told herself she'd imagined it all, that grief had twisted her mind, that the house had played tricks on her. She even convinced herself to throw the box into the river, watching as the Polaroid sank into the dark water. But sometimes, late at night, She swears she still hears them. Not in the house, not even in her dreams, but behind her, whispering, waiting. And every time she closes her eyes, she wonders if her mother's secret died with her, or if it was passed down to Claire instead. The cabin horror might seem like the ultimate nightmare, but the most haunting stories aren't always about what you see. Sometimes, it's about what's left behind, the silence, the questions, and the chilling realization that you may never know the truth. And that's exactly what happened in the case of a disappearance that still baffles investigators to this day. Section 15, a weekend trip gone wrong. It was the summer of 2005. A young woman named Claire decided to take a solo road trip through the Pacific Northwest. She loved nature photography and wanted to spend the weekend capturing the beauty of hidden waterfalls and mountain trails. She kept in touch with her family, texting them updates as she drove from spot to spot. Her last message was short and simple. Found a great trailhead. No service after this point. Will call when I'm back. She was never heard from again. 2 days later, rangers discovered her car parked at a small gravel lot near a trail entrance. Nothing inside suggested foul play. Her backpack and camera gear were gone, presumably taken with her on the hike. The only odd detail? On the dusty back windshield, a finger had traced the words, "Don't look." Her family swore she would never have written something like that herself. Investigators searched the surrounding woods for weeks, combing through miles of terrain with dogs and helicopters. Not a single trace of Claire was found. Months later, a hiker stumbled upon something strange wedged between rocks near a creek bed not far from the trailhead. It was Claire's camera. Somehow, it had survived water damage, and several of the photos were recoverable. The first few images were exactly what her family expected. Shots of waterfalls, wildflowers, sweeping forest landscapes. But the last 3 pictures sent chills down everyone's spine. The first was a blurry photo of trees at night, as if taken in a hurry. The second showed the same woods, but this time in the background, faintly illuminated, stood what looked like a figure. Tall, thin, unmistakably human. The final picture was almost entirely black, except for a flash of white in the corner. Possibly a face, far too close to the lens. Investigators could never confirm what the images truly showed. But one thing was clear. Claire hadn't been alone out there. Over the years, theories spread like wildfire. Some believed she had gotten lost, that the photos were nothing more than her disoriented attempts to use the camera as a flashlight. Others were convinced she had encountered someone out there, maybe a hermit, maybe something worse. Online forums dissected every detail of the final photos, claiming to see multiple figures lurking in the shadows. Her case remains unsolved. No body was ever recovered. No suspects identified. Just an abandoned car, a chilling message scrawled in dust, and 3 haunting photographs that only raise more questions. And here's the part that makes the story stick with people. Claire wasn't the only one. Over the past few decades, dozens of hikers and campers have vanished in similar circumstances across the Pacific Northwest. Their cars found, their gear left behind, their trails ending abruptly in silence. Some believe it's coincidence. Others think there's something darker hiding deep in those forests, something that doesn't want to be found. After that job, I promised myself I'd be more careful about where I spent my nights. But you don't always get to choose who you share space with. And sometimes the danger is already living under the same roof. I was in college, desperate to find a place to live, Rent was insane and dorms were packed. So I found a listing for a cheap room in a quiet neighborhood. I jumped on it. The landlord introduced me to my new roommate, a guy named Rob. He seemed normal, quiet, polite, maybe a little awkward. Honestly, I thought I got lucky. But luck doesn't last. The first week was fine. We kept to ourselves, exchanged polite nods, nothing unusual. Then one night, I noticed some of my things were missing. At first it was small, just a t-shirt, a pair of socks. I thought maybe I misplaced them in the laundry. But then my underwear started disappearing. I brushed it off, telling myself it was probably my fault. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. A few nights later, I woke up to a strange noise outside my bedroom. It was faint at first, like a soft tapping. Then it grew louder. Someone was jiggling my doorknob. My heart stopped. I froze in bed, listening as the knob turned back and forth. Over and over. I wanted to scream, but I was paralyzed. After a few minutes, the noise stopped. I convinced myself it was just the old door creaking in the night. The next morning, Rob casually mentioned that my door didn't seem to lock properly. The way he said it made my skin crawl, like he knew exactly what had happened. Things spiraled from there. One evening, I confronted him after discovering a drawer in my room had been rifled through. I demanded to know if he'd been inside. He laughed, not nervously, not apologetically, just laughed like I had told him a joke. That night, I pushed my desk against the door before going to sleep. But the scariest moment came a few weeks later. I was sitting in class when a friend pulled me aside, her face pale. She whispered that she looked up Rob's name online. He had a record, a violent one, and not the kind you can explain away. When I got home, I locked myself in my room and called my parents. I was shaking, barely able to get the words out. They begged me to pack up and leave that night. But before I could, Rob knocked on my door. "Why are you telling people lies about me?" he asked, his voice calm, almost too calm. I didn't answer. I just sat there in silence, my back pressed against the door. Hours passed. Sometime in the night, I woke up to a horrifying realization. There was someone in my bed. I shot upright, and in the dim glow from the streetlight outside, I saw him. Rob was lying next to me, perfectly still, staring at the ceiling. I don't even remember screaming. I just remember stumbling out of the room, grabbing my phone, and calling the police. When the cops arrived, he acted confused, like he had no idea why I was upset. They didn't arrest him, but they stayed long enough for me to pack my things and leave for good. I never found out what would have happened if I hadn't woken up that night. But sometimes, the people you share your home with aren't strangers at all. They're predators waiting for the right moment. And if you think that's terrifying, imagine strangers smiling at you through the glass, asking, "Come inside." If you ever worked a gas station overnight, you know how isolating it feels. The buzzing lights, the smell of fuel in the air, the hum of refrigerators, it all blends into this eerie white noise. You can go hours without a single car pulling in, and then out of nowhere, someone appears. One night, around 2 a.m., a man walked inside. He looked frustrated, running a hand through his messy hair. He told me his car had broken down just outside the lot. "You can see it on the cameras," he said, gesturing toward the monitors. I looked, and sure enough, there was a car parked just off to the side with its hood up. Classic breakdown scenario. He asked if I could step outside and give him a hand, maybe even help push it. I almost said yes. Almost, but something in me hesitated. I don't even know why. Maybe the way he avoided eye contact. Maybe the way he kept shifting his weight like he was nervous. Then I noticed movement on the monitor. Just for a second, a shadow shifted near the back of the car. Someone crouching down. My stomach dropped. The man hadn't mentioned anyone else being there. I forced a smile and said, "Don't worry, I'll call a tow truck for you." That's when his face changed. It wasn't frustration anymore. It was something darker, like I'd ruined a plan he had carefully set up. He muttered something under his breath, turned, and walked out. By the time I pressed the panic button under the counter, the car was gone. Not broken down. Not stalled. Just gone. The police searched the area, but of course, they found nothing. To this day, I wonder if I walked outside, would I have been pushed into that car instead of helping to push it? I've always loved the outdoors. Hiking, fresh air, the quiet of the woods. It was my escape from the chaos of everyday life. So one summer, I decided to take a solo camping trip. Just me, a tent, and a weekend away from everything. The first night was peaceful. I set up camp near a small clearing, built a fire, and fell asleep to the sound of crickets. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up, not to crickets, not to wind, to footsteps. They were faint at first, circling the tent, crunching leaves, breaking twigs. I told myself it had to be an animal, maybe a deer. But then I heard breathing, slow, heavy breathing. I froze, not daring to move, my hand gripping the flashlight beside me. Whoever or whatever it was, they stopped right outside my tent. The fabric bulged inward, as if someone was pressing a hand against it. I held my breath until the pressure disappeared. Minutes passed in silence, and finally, I heard the footsteps fade into the distance. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next morning, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. My blood ran cold. In the dirt, all around my campsite, were footprints. Human footprints. They circled the tent again and again, stopping right at the entrance, but never leaving a trail out of the clearing. I packed up and left that morning, cutting the trip short. On the hike back, I kept glancing behind me, certain I was being followed. And here's the part that still keeps me up at night. When I got home and unrolled my tent to clean it, I found something tucked inside the folds of the fabric. A small piece of paper. Scrawled in messy handwriting were 3 words. "See you soon." Working retail at night, you get used to seeing weird things. People coming in half days, buying random items, or talking to themselves. But this night, I had a customer I'll never forget. It was close to closing, maybe 15 minutes before I locked the doors. A woman walked in, pale skin, long black hair, oversized coat. She moved slowly, almost gliding down the aisles. I asked if she needed help. She didn't answer. She just kept drifting, like she didn't even hear me. Finally, she came to the counter and placed a single item down. A pack of candles. No words, no eye contact. Just set them down and waited. I rang her up, bagged the candles, and handed them over. But when I looked up, she was gone. Not walking out the door. Not anywhere in the store. Just gone. Confused, I checked the cameras. On the screen, I saw myself ringing up the candles, sliding them across the counter. But on the footage, the other side of the counter was empty. No woman. No one. I was alone the entire time. Some of the scariest things I've dealt with on the road haven't been ghosts or shadows. They've been people, flesh and blood. And this one, I still don't know what their intentions were, but I know it wasn't good. I was hauling through Arkansas late one night, long stretch of highway, no exits for miles. The road was mine alone, until a pair of headlights appeared in my mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. Cars come and go, but this one stayed. No matter how fast or slow I went, they matched my speed perfectly. Not close enough to tailgate, but just far enough back to stay in my mirrors. 10 minutes went by, then 20, 30, and those headlights never left. I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe another night out, just cruising along. But then the car edged closer. High beams flashed once. Then again, I tapped my brakes, hoping they'd get the message. Instead, they drifted even closer, hugging my blind spot where I couldn't quite see them. My skin crawled, every nerve on high alert. I switched lanes. So, did they? I slowed down. They slowed down. At that point, my hands were slick with sweat on the wheel. I knew I couldn't just pull over, not on a dark stretch of road like this with no one around. So I did what truckers are taught to do when things feel wrong. I got on the CB radio and started calling out, hoping another driver nearby might hear. Nothing but static. The car lingered there for almost an hour. I could feel them watching me, waiting, and the longer it went on, the more I started to wonder if they were planning something. Finally, up ahead, I spotted Salvation, a brightly lit way station, open late. I signaled hard, pulled off, and rolled in. The car followed me up the ramp, but right before the entrance, they swerved, tires screeching, and bolted back onto the highway. I never saw their face. Never even got a clear look at the car, just those damn headlights glued to me in the mirror. But here's the part that chills me the most. When I stopped inside the station, one of the inspectors came over and told me I'd made the right call. He said the stretch of highway had a history, drivers being followed, harassed, even forced off the road. Some of them never made it back. To this day, whenever a car hangs behind me too long, I feel that same cold dread in my chest. Because out there on the open road, you're more vulnerable than you think. And sometimes, the real monsters aren't the ones hiding in the dark. They're the ones with their headlights on, waiting for you to make the wrong move. If you thought the Idaho stalker was terrifying, wait until you hear what happened to a group of friends who thought a weekend in the woods would be the perfect escape. They weren't expecting danger, let alone a nightmarish encounter that would change the way they looked at cabins forever. It was the fall of 2018. 4 college students, 2 couples, rented a cabin deep in the Appalachian Mountains. They wanted a break from school, a place where no one could bother them, just hiking, laughter, and a little partying. The cabin itself was rustic, perched near a lake, with old wood creaking under every step. It didn't bother them. In fact, they thought it added to the charm. The first night went smoothly. They grilled food, told stories, and played music until late. But as the night dragged on, one of the friends swore he saw a shadow move past the tree line, just outside the firelight. They laughed it off. After all, it was the woods. Shadows move, animals wander, paranoia happens, right? The second night, things felt different. As they sat around the fire, faint snapping sounds echoed from the forest. Twigs breaking, leaves crunching, like footsteps circling them just out of sight. Every time they shined a flashlight into the trees, the sound stopped. Later, when they finally went inside, one of the girls swore she heard whispering outside her window. Not wind, not the trees. Actual voices. But when her boyfriend checked, there was nothing there. They laughed it off again, but unease lingered like smoke in the air. Around 3 a.m., just as everyone was dozing off, came a loud knock on the cabin door. All 4 of them shot upright. Who would be out here at this hour? The knocking grew louder, harder, until it echoed through the entire cabin. One of the guys grabbed a baseball bat and approached the door cautiously. When he asked who it was, the knocking stopped. Silence. He opened the peephole and froze. Standing on the porch were 3 figures, motionless, dressed in dark, tattered clothing, their faces hidden behind masks that looked handmade, crude, stitched together, almost like burlap sacks. The tallest one tilted his head slowly, as if studying him through the peephole. The guys stumbled back, heart racing. The figures didn't knock again. They just stood there, silent, staring, for hours. By dawn, the masked strangers were gone. The group tried to convince themselves it had been some twisted prank, maybe locals messing with outsiders. They decided to pack up and leave that day. But before they could, things escalated. While loading the car, they found deep scratches etched into the cabin's wooden walls. Carved word that read, "We see you." That night, their last before leaving, the knocking returned. This time, at every window, every door, all at once. The sound surrounded them, relentless, like a storm of fists pounding in rhythm. They huddled together in the living room, praying it would stop. And then the back door burst open. The tallest masked figure stepped inside, followed by the others. The friends screamed, scattering in every direction. The baseball bat connected with one intruder's shoulder, but he didn't flinch. They moved silently, deliberately, cornering the group. The students fought, throwing anything they could grab. Somehow, one of them managed to shove a stranger into a wall hard enough to knock his mask loose. For a split second, they saw his face. It wasn't some deranged stranger. It was a local man, ordinary, someone they might have passed in town earlier that week. The group bolted to the front door and into the woods, running until their lungs burned. They didn't stop until they reached a ranger station miles away. When they returned with authorities, the cabin was empty. No intruders. No masks. Only the words carved into the wood, deeper this time, "Come back soon." The police brushed it off as a cruel prank. But the students never forgot that night. The way the strangers moved. The silence. The message carved into the walls. They left the cabin behind, but the memory followed them long after college. And here's the unsettling truth. Across the country, in isolated areas, reports of masked figures terrorizing cabins pop up more often than you'd think. Sometimes it's written off as kids causing trouble. Other times, there's no explanation at all. It's easy to dismiss stories like these as urban legends, campfire tales designed to scare. But when you hear about what happened in the final story, you'll realize some nightmares are all too real. And sometimes the scariest part isn't what happens to you, but what you never find out. I've taken ride shares 100 times, and most of them are forgettable. You get in, you nod, you scroll your phone, and before you know it, you're home. But there was one night that changed how I look at those apps forever. It was late, close to midnight, when I ordered a ride after a party. The driver pulled up in a black sedan, clean, nothing unusual. I got in, said hello, and gave him a polite smile. He didn't respond, just stared straight ahead. That was the first red flag. The second came a few minutes later. I noticed his phone wasn't mounted anywhere. Instead of following the app's directions, he kept glancing at a piece of paper on the passenger seat, a handwritten list of addresses. I leaned forward, my voice uneasy. You got my destination, right? He nodded, but didn't say a word. The silence was suffocating. As the minutes passed, I realized he wasn't heading toward my neighborhood at all. The streets looked unfamiliar, darker, emptier. My pulse quickened, and I blurted out, "You missed a turn." That's when he finally spoke. "No," he said flatly, his eyes never leaving the road. We're almost there. Almost where? Panic clawed at my chest. I pulled out my phone, pretending to text someone, but really I was dropping my live location to a friend. The driver must have noticed, because his grip tightened on the wheel, his knuckles turning white. Phones can be distracting, he muttered. That was the breaking point. I forced a nervous laugh and said, "Actually, I think I left something back at the party. Could you drop me off here?" He didn't answer. The car kept moving. I reached for the door handle, my heart hammering. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his expression cold. "You don't want to do that," he said. I didn't think, I just acted. I yanked the door open while the car slowed at a stop sign and stumbled out onto the street. My knees scraped against the asphalt, but I didn't care. I bolted toward the nearest lit gas station, not once looking back. By the time I got the courage to glance outside, the car was gone. No license plate, no trace. When I tried to report it to the rideshare app, they told me no driver with that description had been assigned to my trip. According to their system, I never even got in a car. To this day, I still wonder, whose car was I in that night? When I first moved into my apartment, I thought I'd lucked out. The rent was cheap, the neighborhood was quiet, and my neighbor across the hall seemed friendly enough. He was older, maybe late 40s, always quick with a smile whenever we passed each other in the hallway. At first, I appreciated how polite he was. He'd hold the elevator door, ask about my day, even bring in packages left outside my door. It felt like the kind of neighbor everyone wishes they had. But over time, it started to feel like too much. One morning, I stepped out into the hall and found a cup of coffee waiting outside my door. No note, no explanation. Just sitting there, still warm. I didn't think much of it until it happened again. And again, always waiting when I opened my door in the morning. One evening, as I was unlocking my apartment, I heard his door crack open behind me. His voice was low, almost playful. "Did you like the coffee?" My stomach dropped. I never told him I was the one who kept finding it, and I sure as hell never thanked him. I laughed awkwardly, muttered a quick, "Yeah, thanks," and hurried inside. But from that night on, I started noticing other things. Every time I left my apartment, I'd hear his peephole creak open. Every time I came home, his door would be ajar just slightly, as if he'd been waiting. Once, when I came back late from work, I found a sticky note pressed to my door that said, "You work too hard. Get some rest." That was the moment I realized he was watching me. I installed a chain lock, double-checked the windows, tried to convince myself I was overthinking, until one night, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of my doorknob turning. Slow, careful, testing the lock. I froze in bed, my breath caught in my throat, praying the lock would hold. After what felt like forever, the noise stopped. The next morning, I found another note. This one read, "Locks won't keep friends apart forever." I moved out the next week. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if he's sitting across the hall from someone new, waiting for them to notice the coffee. After the pizza delivery nightmare, you might think these kind of encounters are rare, unlucky accidents that only happen once in a while, but the truth is, they happen far more often than people realize. And the next story takes us out of the suburbs and into the quiet, remote stretches of Idaho, where a teenager discovered just how dangerous isolation can be. It was the spring of 2013. A 17-year-old boy had just moved with his family to a quiet, rural town in Idaho. Their new home sat at the edge of a forest, miles away from the nearest neighbor. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a safer, calmer life away from the noise of the city. At first, it was perfect. He spent his days helping his dad chop wood, exploring trails, and walking the family's German shepherd, Max. With no nearby friends, he entertained himself with long hikes and endless hours online. The peace and quiet felt almost therapeutic. But as he would soon learn, peace can sometimes hide danger just beneath the surface. One night, he sat in the living room scrolling on his phone while Max dozed by his feet. Out of nowhere, Max lifted his head, ears perked, eyes locked on the window. The boy followed the dog's gaze and froze. Outside, pressed against the glass, was the pale face of a man. He wasn't wearing a mask, wasn't trying to hide. He was smiling, and in his hand, reflecting faintly in the moonlight, was a long knife. The boy gasped, stumbling backward. The man just stood there, grinning, tapping the knife gently against the window pane like he was knocking politely. By the time the boy grabbed his phone to call his dad, the figure had disappeared into the darkness of the trees. For a while, nothing else happened. His parents thought maybe it was just a prank, or that he had imagined it entirely. But then, the tapping started. Every night around 2 a.m., faint knocks would echo against windows. Sometimes it was a living room, sometimes a kitchen, sometimes his bedroom window while he tried to sleep. Every time he worked up the courage to peek outside, all he saw were footprints in the dirt, circling the house in wide, deliberate patterns. Max would growl, pacing restlessly, nose pressed to the glass. But no matter how quickly the boy ran outside with a flashlight, there was never anyone there, just silence, and the sense that someone was watching, just out of sight. Weeks went by like this, until one night, things escalated. The boy was brushing his teeth before bed when Max suddenly went berserk, snarling, barking, and throwing himself at the back door. The boy sprinted to the kitchen, just in time to see the same man standing in the yard. This time, he wasn't smiling. He wasn't knocking. He was just standing there, gripping the knife tighter, staring directly at the boy through the glass. The boy's father burst into the room, shouting as he reached for the shotgun by the door. But before he could even open it, the man bolted into the woods, moving faster than either of them thought possible. They searched the property that night with police, but found nothing. Only a trail of footprints that vanished deep into the trees. The stalker was never caught. And to this day, the boy still remembers that smile pressed against the glass, the sound of a knife tapping on his window in the dead of night. What's disturbing is how many of these encounters never end with an arrest or even an explanation. Sometimes, people vanish back into night, like they were never there at all. But when a group of college students rented a secluded cabin in the woods, they discover that not every intruder simply disappears. New Year's Eve is supposed to feel exciting. Fresh start, clean slate, celebration. But that night, what I got was a kind of memory that makes me question if I ever want to step into a crowded party again. A friend had invited me to a small get-together. Nothing wild. Just music, food, a few drinks, and a countdown at midnight. The house was packed with strangers, but I figured that was normal. You bring friends, they bring friends. It all blends together. But almost immediately, I noticed something off. There was a man standing in the corner of the living room, not talking to anyone, not laughing, not drinking, just staring. His eyes scanned the crowd like he was studying us, one face at a time. I tried to ignore it, telling myself he was probably just shy. But then midnight came. Everyone was counting down, cheering, hugging. The noise was deafening. But in that chaos, I felt a hand grip my arm. Not a friendly touch, a tight grip. I turned and it was him, the man from the corner. "Come with me," he whispered. I pulled back, but his fingers dug in harder. The music was so loud, nobody noticed. My heart pounded as he tried to steer me toward the back door. For a split second, I froze, because that's what fear does. It paralyzes you. Then I yanked my arm free and shoved past him, stumbling into the kitchen. I shouted for my friend, my voice cracking. But by the time anyone turned to look, the man was gone. The rest of the night blurred together. I couldn't enjoy a second of it. Every shadow in the room felt like him. Every time the door opened, I was sure he'd walk back in. The next morning, I asked my friend who he was, thinking maybe he had been invited after all. She looked at me, confused. "What man?" she said. We went over the guest list, asked around. Nobody remembered seeing him. Nobody even knew his name. And that's what keeps me awake sometimes. The idea that someone could slip into a party, blend into background, and try to walk out with a stranger like it was nothing. They say New Year's is about new beginnings. But for me, it's a reminder that sometimes endings are closer than you think. I don't usually pick up hitchhikers. It's one of those rules you hear growing up. Don't talk to strangers. Don't let them in your car. But that night, the highway was deserted, and the man on the side of the road looked desperate. He was standing under a flickering streetlight, holding a small duffel bag, his thumb out. It was raining, and his clothes were soaked through. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over. He opened the door, slid into the passenger seat, and gave me a quick nod. "Thanks. Been out here a long time." His voice was calm, polite even, but something about the way he clutched that bag, it was like he was protecting it or hiding it. As we drove, I tried to make small talk, asked where he was headed. He gave vague answers, never once looking me in the eye. Instead, his gaze flicked constantly to the rear-view mirror, like he was making sure nobody was following us. A few miles in, he finally asked me something. His voice dropped low, almost a whisper. "You ever wonder how many people vanish on roads like this?" The question sent a chill down my spine. I laughed nervously, pretending I thought he was joking, but he didn't laugh back. He just smiled, thin, sharp, unsettling. That's when I noticed the duffel bag wasn't zipped all the way, and sticking out from the opening was a knife handle. My throat went dry. My hands tightened on the wheel. I wanted to pull over, but I couldn't just throw him out into the rain without setting him off. So I kept driving, my heart racing, trying to act normal. After a few more miles, he leaned back in the seat and muttered, "This looks like a good spot." Before I could respond, he told me to stop the car. We were in the middle of nowhere, no houses, no gas stations, just trees and darkness. I did what he said, my pulse thundering in my ears. He grabbed his bag, gave me that same thin smile, and stepped out into the rain. For a moment, relief washed over me. But then, before closing the door, he leaned back in and said, "Drive safe. You never know who you'll meet out here." And then he was gone. I floored it, not daring to look back. To this day, I don't know if he was just a strange, unsettling man, or if I narrowly avoided becoming another missing person on that endless stretch of highway One of the worst parts of night shifts isn't the hours themselves. It's walking back to your car when you're finally done. At 3 or 4 in the morning, the lot outside is empty, silent, and feels like it goes on forever. That night, I just finished a shift at a 24-hour diner. I stepped outside, lit by nothing but those harsh yellow parking lot lights, and started walking toward my car. Halfway across, I heard it, a faint crunch of gravel. I froze, pretending to dig through my bag, and looked around. There was no one, just row after row of empty spaces. But then I heard it again, closer this time. I quickened my pace. My car was only a few spots away. I unlocked it with shaking hands. And that's when I saw him, a man crouched low between 2 cars, watching me. The second our eyes met, he rose slowly, not rushing, not even trying to hide anymore, just standing there, tall and unmoving, like he knew I'd already seen too much. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and fumbled to start the engine. My hands were sweating so badly, the keys almost slipped. Finally, the engine roared, and I threw the car into reverse. In the rear-view mirror, he was walking toward me. Calm, steady steps. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I tore out of the lot, tires squealing, heart pounding. The next morning, when I came back for another shift, my manager told me something strange. Security had caught footage of the man. He didn't leave the lot when I did. He stayed. Hours after I'd gone, he was still there, walking up and down the rows of cars, as if he was waiting for someone else. No one ever saw him again. But every night since, I check under and between my car before I get in. I was traveling for work when I booked an Airbnb in a small town I'd never been to before. The listing looked nice, modern, clean, plenty of positive reviews. The host even offered to meet me at check-in, which I thought was a nice personal touch. When I arrived, the house looked just like the photos. The host, a tall man with an unervingly wide smile, greeted me at the door. He shook my hand a little too long, his eyes never leaving mine. "Make yourself at home," he said. "You're safe here." The way he emphasized that last part, it didn't sound reassuring. It sounded like a warning. At first, I brushed it off as awkward small talk. I set my bags down, checked the bedroom, and everything seemed fine. But later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something odd. The vent above the bed wasn't blowing any air. In fact, it didn't even look like it was connected to the air system. It looked fake. I climbed onto the nightstand, shined my phone flashlight inside, and my stomach dropped. Behind the vent cover, there was a small camera lens pointing directly at the bed. My skin went cold. I packed my things immediately, but when I reached the front door, the deadbolt wouldn't turn. I tried again, harder this time, but it was jammed. That's when I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The host was still in the house. Heart pounding. I rushed to the back, trying every window until finally one slid open. I shoved my bag through, crawled out, and sprinted into the street without looking back. I reported the listing to Airbnb the next morning, but when I checked again a few days later, it was still up. Same photos, same host, same house. And I couldn't stop wondering, how many people stayed there and never thought to check the vent? I've picked up hitchhikers before. Not often, but every once in a while when someone looked genuinely stranded, I'd pull over and offer a lift. Truckers have a bad rep for ignoring people, but out on lonely roads, sometimes we're the only help around. But after this one night, I'll never stop for anyone again. It was around 3 a.m., middle of nowhere in Texas, the kind of two-lane highway where you could drive for an hour without seeing another soul. I was halfway through a long shift when my headlights caught someone walking on the shoulder. It was a woman. She wore this pale blue dress that looked out of place, like it belonged in the 1950s. She had long dark hair, and she walked slow, one hand raised slightly like she was signaling for me to stop. At first, I thought she'd been in an accident. Maybe a car broke down, and she was looking for help. So against my better judgment, I slowed, rolled down my passenger side window, and leaned across the cab. "Need a ride?" I called out. She didn't answer, just turned her head toward me. And I'll never forget what I saw. Her face was pale, too pale, almost gray, and her eyes looked cloudy, like smoke trapped behind glass. But the strangest part, she didn't look surprised or scared. She looked calm, like she'd been waiting for me. Against every instinct I had, I unlocked the passenger door, and she climbed in. Her movements were slow, stiff, like her joints didn't work right. She settled into the seat without saying a word, just folded her hands in her lap and stared straight ahead. For a few miles, I tried to talk to her, asked if she was okay, asked if she needed me to call someone. Nothing, not a sound. The silence in that cab was suffocating. Finally, I glanced over at her, and she was gone. The seat was empty. No sound, no door opening, no movement, just gone. My stomach lurched, and I nearly drove off the road. I slammed the brakes, pulled onto the shoulder, and flipped on every light I had. I searched the cab, the trailer, even the road behind me. Nothing. She had vanished. I sat there for a long time, trying to calm my breathing. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd fallen asleep for a second, maybe dreamed the whole thing. But here's the part that keeps me awake even now. When I finally looked over at the passenger seat again, it was damp. The fabric was wet, like someone had been sitting there in soaking clothes. I left it like that. Never cleaned it. That truck's long gone now. But sometimes I wonder who's driving it, and if they've ever felt the same cold chill I did when she first turned her cloudy eyes toward me. Every driver has seen it at least once, the lonely figure on the side of the road. Thumb raised, a face half hidden in the shadows. You tell yourself it's harmless, just someone stranded, desperate for a ride. That's what Daniel thought. He was driving home after visiting friends out of town, the highway stretching endlessly before him. Midnight had passed, and the road was empty except for beams of his headlights cutting through the fog. That's when he saw her, a young woman standing at the shoulder of the road. Pale thin, her long hair damp as if she'd been caught in the rain. She wore a faded dress, torn at the edges, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Daniel slowed down, rolling down the window. "Need a lift?" he called out. The girl nodded silently and climbed into the back seat. For the first few miles, neither of them spoke. Daniel kept glancing at her in the rear-view mirror. Her eyes were fixed on the window, staring into the darkness outside. Her lips moved occasionally, but no words came out. Finally, he asked, "Where you headed?" She whispered an address, a neighborhood Daniel vaguely recognized, about 20 minutes away. He tried to make small talk. "What were you doing out here?" But she didn't answer, just kept staring. The silence grew heavier with each passing mile. Something about the air felt wrong, colder, as if the temperature in the car had dropped. When they finally pulled into the neighborhood, Daniel turned to ask which house was hers. But the back seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. The lock hadn't clicked. She was simply gone. Daniel's chest tightened. He pulled over, heart racing, and stepped out of the car, looking around desperately. No trace of her. But when he glanced at the passenger seat, his blood froze. Lying there was a small, wet scarf, torn, dirty, and damp with something darker than rain. The next day, Still shaken, Daniel drove to the address she'd whispered. He knocked on the door, clutching the scarf in his hand. An elderly woman answered. When he described the girl, the woman's face went pale. "That's my daughter," she said softly. "She died on that road 20 years ago." She reached out and touched the scarf, tears filling her eyes. She was wearing this the night of the accident. Daniel left without saying a word. But sometimes when he drives late at night, he swears he feels someone sitting in the back seat, silent, watching. If you can still sleep after this, consider yourself lucky others never could.